All right, let's jump right in. We're about to unpack one of the most incredible survival stories in all of history. Seriously, it's a legendary tale. We're talking about Xenophon's Anabasis, which you probably know as the March of the 10,000. So picture this. It's 401 BCE. You have an army of about 10,000 elite Greek mercenaries. These guys are the best of the best, the most feared soldiers money can buy. And they find themselves in an absolutely impossible situation. Their boss is dead. They're stranded more than 1,000 miles from home, totally surrounded by enemies, with no food, no water, and definitely no friends. For centuries, we've told this story as a straight-up epic of courage and sheer will. But what if there's more to it? What if the huge battle they thought they won was actually a brilliant trap? And what if the guy telling us the whole story, the very general who led them home, wasn't exactly giving us the whole truth? Yeah, let's dig into that. Okay, so how in the world did they get into this mess? Well, it all kicks off with one very, very strange battle. A battle where, from their point of view, they were totally victorious and, at the exact same time, completely and utterly defeated. See, these Greek mercenaries were hired by a Persian prince named Cyrus. He was trying to snatch the throne from his own brother, King Artaxerxes. So at the Battle of Cunaxa, the Greeks did precisely what they were paid for. They formed up their phalanx, that terrifying wall of bronze shields and iron spears, and they charged. The Persian troops across from them, they didn't even put up a fight. They just broke and ran. But here's the catch. While the Greeks were busy chasing the enemy off the field, the real fight was happening somewhere else entirely. In the center of the battle, Cyrus spots his brother, Artaxerxes. He gets this crazy idea and launches a reckless cavalry charge, trying to end the entire war right then and there. Well, he gets hit with a javelin, gets swarmed by the king's bodyguards, and that's it. His rebellion, his cause, it all dies with him. And this, right here, just perfectly captures the whole paradox. For every single Greek soldier on that field, they had just won a flawless victory. They hadn't lost a single man, their formation was solid, and they were ready for round two. They had absolutely no clue that their entire reason for being there was now gone. So that leads us to a really big question. Why did the Persians, who had this massive army, seem so, weak? Were they just a bunch of cowards, or was there something much, much smarter going on here? Xenophon, who's our main source for all this, basically paints the Persians as being terrified of the Greeks. He says they just broke and ran at the very first sign of trouble. And for the longest time, that's the story everyone believed. But modern historians have started to look at this whole thing from the Persian side, and a very different picture starts to emerge. So on the one hand, you've got the traditional Greek view. The Persians were cowards, plain and simple. But on the other hand, there's this really compelling modern theory that says this was a calculated, absolutely brilliant strategy, a deliberate non-engagement. In other words, they ran away on purpose. Okay, check out the Persian playbook here because it reframes the entire battle. Their goal was never to fight the Greeks. Why would it be? The Greeks were just hired muscle. The only thing that mattered was taking out Cyrus. So step one, lure the super dangerous but politically unimportant Greeks away on a wild goose chase. Step two, focus all your best troops on the one guy who actually matters, Cyrus. And step three, once he's dead, the Greeks are just an isolated army stuck in the middle of your empire. You haven't lost a single valuable soldier fighting them, and now you can just let them starve in the desert. It's kind of genius, right? A strategic masterpiece. And all of that brings us to the famous march itself. After the battle, their generals were treacherously captured and killed. So the Greeks had to elect new leaders, including our storyteller, Xenophon, and they began this impossible journey home. I mean, just look at the sheer scale of this journey. We're talking about a trek of nearly 5,000 kilometers. That's about 3,000 miles, all through hostile territory. It took them from modern-day Iraq, up through the rugged mountains of Kurdistan, into a brutal Armenian winter, and then finally to the shores of the Black Sea. This wasn't a trip that took weeks, it took years. And to give you just a little taste of the conditions they were dealing with, especially that winter in the Armenian highlands, the snowdrifts were often 6 feet deep, and they were walking through this in thin tunics and whatever was left of their sandals. The human cost was just staggering. Guys were losing their toes, even their feet, to frostbite. The constant glare from the snow was causing widespread snow blindness. Xenophon even describes this condition he calls bulimia, basically hunger faintness, where men would just collapse from starvation. And all the while, they were under constant guerrilla attack from these fierce mountain tribes, like the Carduchians, who were just raining down arrows and boulders on them from the high passes. The despair got so deep that some men, they just gave up. They'd lie down in the snow, refuse to move, and literally beg Xenophon to kill them, because they preferred a quick death to the misery of another day's march. So you see, this wasn't some heroic adventure. It was a nasty, grinding, brutal fight to just stay alive. And right in the middle of all this suffering, Xenophon describes these brief little moments of relief that somehow only make the desperation seem worse. He talks about finding these Armenian villages where the men just feasted on lamb, pork, and amazing wines. But moments like this, they were just fleeting little islands in a vast ocean of starvation. So against all odds, the army makes it to the sea. It's an incredible story, but this is where things get even more complicated. Because now we have to talk about the man who's telling us this story, who also happens to be the story's main hero. You see, pretty much our entire understanding of this epic march comes from one guy, Xenophon. He was an Athenian, a student of the famous philosopher Socrates, and, conveniently, one of the generals who got elected to lead the men home. He wrote the book, and he made sure to cast himself as the star of the show. And this is the million-dollar question, right? When the author is also the hero of his own story, you've got to ask, is he just giving us the facts, or is he maybe, shaping the story to make himself and his ideas look as good as humanly possible? And this isn't just a hunch. We actually have some hard data to back this suspicion up. This chart compares Xenophon's timeline with the only other ancient source we have, Diodorus. And, well, the numbers just don't add up. For one really important part of the journey, Xenophon says it took 5 days. Diodorus says 15. Diodorus also includes 19 days of rest that Xenophon just completely forgets to mention. That's almost a whole month of travel that Xenophon seems to have intentionally erased from his history. Why? Why would he do that? Well, the answer might be something scholars call Socratic history. You have to remember, Xenophon wrote this book after his famous teacher, Socrates, had been executed by Athens for corrupting the youth. The theory is that Xenophon wasn't just writing a war story, he was writing a defense of his master. He was using this insane march as a real-world experiment to prove that a leader educated with Socratic principles, rational, well-spoken, moral, was the ideal leader. He basically shaped himself into the perfect hero to prove that Socrates' controversial teachings actually worked. So let's pull all of these different threads together. What is the Anabasis, really? The truth is, it's not just one thing. It's a lot of things. The reason the Anabasis is still so fascinating today is that it works on so many different levels. Yes, it's a thrilling adventure story for sure, but as we've seen, it's also a case study in a brilliant Persian military strategy. It's a masterclass in leadership under extreme pressure. It's a valuable, if not entirely objective, source on the ancient peoples of the region, like the Carthusians. And, maybe most surprisingly of all, it's a really sophisticated piece of philosophical propaganda. And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. The story of the 10,000 is incredible, no doubt. But the story behind the story might be even more interesting. It's a powerful reminder that history is never just a simple list of facts. It's always a narrative, shaped by someone with a point of view, a bias, and a reason for telling it. And Xenophon's Anabasis might just be one of the greatest examples of that ever.